Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Happy Tuesday morning for those of you joining us in person, as well as those of you who are joining us on the live stream. We appreciate it. This is going to be a great event that's focused on the future of medicine. It's a conversation that we are doing in partnership with Incubate. For those of you that haven't yet checked it out, I encourage you to check out the full project that we did on the future of medicine. We looked at the state of play, the legislative landscapes, who the players are, and what's next in the space. I got a really great reception. We also had a special edition podcast that went with that as well. This morning, I'll be sitting down with Representative Greg Murphy, the Republican from North Carolina. A doctor, Representative Murphy also serves as vice chair of the Veterans Affairs Health Subcommittee and on the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. We're going to talk news of the day, nothing happening, of course, as well as the future of medicine, what he's seeing on the legislative landscape on that as well. Afterwards, I'm going to be joined on stage by John Stanford, Executive Director and founder of Incubate, as well as Janice Nave, Venture Partner at Coda Capital, for a fireside chat. As always, you can find Punchbowl News on all social media channels at Punchbowl News. We encourage you to share about this conversation. With that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Murphy to the stage. Congressman. All right, thank you, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, well, we are going to talk the future of medicine, but first, as always at Punchbowl News events, we talk a little bit news of the day, and there's no shortage of things happening. I want to get to two kind of big topics. One, what is happening in the Middle East. Your colleagues, a lot have been supportive of President Donald Trump and the effort that he's making around Iran and Israel. Some have been skeptical or concerned about a forever war. Where do you stand on that? How concerned are you that this ceasefire is tenuous, maybe at best?
Well, anything in the Middle East is tenuous. But I think let's take everybody back to our childhood. You remember there was this bully? Not that you ever had bullies, but who finally used to just kind of bully people. And then one day somebody went up and popped them and took them out. Wasn't everybody happy about that? Guys, we live in a world that we have had the Cold War that's allowed good, bad, or indifferent peace to be the name of the game for the last, 50 years, since or 75 years, really since the end of World War II. It's been the threat of nuclear war that has kept us safe. You had secular governments, China, India, Russia, that have kept their gun in their holster. We've seen a proclivity with Iran via its proxies to use religion as a premise for war, for killing. And if Iran was allowed to get a nuclear bomb, there would be, in my mind, and I think in a large number of individuals' minds, no reason for them not to carry out war, death to Israel, death to America, et cetera, because they view war as a holy thing rather than a secular fight. And so this was a long time in coming, and it was due to the weakness and, in my opinion, negligence of many administrations that allowed Iran to get to the point where it is. And pound for pound, Israel's like a wolverine, the toughest beast you're ever going to meet. And sad thing is, it needed to happen. I'm sorry that it did. It's sad for the loss of life, but you cannot allow a terrorist regime to have a nuclear bomb, period. And, there's this fight about congressional intent. If you have that question, go back and see what Obama did with Libya. Go back, there are other precursors for this. The president did what he had to do, and the world took a sigh of relief with it.
All right, we'll have to see how it ultimately turns out. I do want to shift gears kind of abruptly from that, but the biggest topic on Capitol Hill, reconciliation. The House did its job, moved it to the Senate, and now we're seeing a lot of movement, different senators wanting to put their stamp on it. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest issues, though, is Medicaid. And yesterday, your home state senator, Tom Tillis, was walking around handing out a flyer saying that your state of North Carolina would be the hardest hit if the Senate's provision is enacted. How concerned are you about these Medicaid cuts? You're from a rural district.
Yeah. So just so folks understand, there's a thing called the FMAP. When they expanded Medicaid, normally Medicaid is a 2/3 federal share, 1/3 state share. When you expanded Medicaid, and look, when in North Carolina in 2016, I was co-author to something called Carolina's Cares, which tried to expand Medicaid under the terms that were seen at that point in time. These are, if you've any of y'all ever been to the Outer Banks? I know a lot of y'all have been to Eastern North Carolina. It's a very rural area. These are where farmers are. They're fishermen, they're clergy, people who are the working poor that don't make enough really to be able to afford insurance, especially in today's environment, but also want to work. They're the working people. And so the expansion of Medicaid allowed them to have access to health care, but also continue to work. What the Senate's provision was to take that 90% federal share and drop it down. There is a trigger in North Carolina in the legislature, as well as in, I believe, 13 other states, that said if the federal share dropped below 90%, Medicaid expansion is off the table. It would be catastrophic for North Carolina. Catastrophic for North Carolina. So the things that, guys, I've been practicing in Eastern North Carolina for 35 years, and I continue to do so. Our Medicaid population, for the vast majority, are people who are poor, impoverished, disabled. We have other folks in the expansion population that are working. We need to reform the system. I see patients all the time that, in my opinion, have been put on Medicaid and should be rolled off of Medicaid. But fixing the Medicaid problem is not going to be the way the Senate wants to do it. I won't vote for anything that does that.
Okay.
Period, point blank. And I've told Senator Tillis that in no uncertain terms.
And so you feel like there will be some kind of a fix, something will be changed or tweaked. Is there something you can accept?
Well, I think what the House did was actually thoughtful. I love our senators, but I don't know who wrote that bill. If you look at where trying to get out waste, fraud, and abuse, get the ineligible, get the illegal, and get the folks who are able-bodied back off the system and get them having jobs, good God. If people want jobs in Eastern North Carolina, they have their pick. And those folks pay good wages. They provide good health insurance. That's how you reform a system. Cutting the FMAP is not a tenable way to do it.
All right, we're going to get to the future of medicine, but before I do, I would be remiss if I did not ask North Carolina, a hotbed of politics. Senator Tillis.
I thought you were just say it's hot.
I mean, it's hot here, so we can't. We're probably samey on that account. But is Senator Tillis the best person to represent your state in the Senate?
I think I would be much better, and I've told him that multiple times.
Are you going to run the primary? Are we making some real news here?
I've showed up at 3 of his fundraisers and introduced myself, and I said I'm going to primary Tom Tillis, and I'm going to kick his butt. And so anyway, no, I think Tom does an excellent job. He has some work to do with some different constituencies within the Republican Party, and I think he understands that. But Tom's now been a 2-term senator. I think he's gained some seniority. We're in a purple state. We're in a purple state, whether people agree with it or not. It's just a fact. Trump won it, I guess, by what, 3.5, close to 4 points. Right. But we still, given the areas of metropolitan, Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, those areas which are hotbed for, Democrats, we still are a purple state.
Okay, well, we will see. Let's talk about the topic of the day, the future of medicine. You have been a big proponent of the EPIC Act. Walk us through the goal of that legislation for anyone here who isn't familiar with it when it comes to changes that were made to the Inflation Reduction Act related to small molecule medicines.
Okay. Guys, I will, if any of y'all have ever been in a lab, there's a lot of work that gets done to create a molecule that may then eventually be something, a cure for cancer or asthma or something else. It starts out at the bench. Maybe it'll start out in a computer now with AI. But there's a lot that goes from the alpha to the omega as far as creating a molecule to being able to deliver a pill or an infusion or something called a biologic. And in some instances, that can cost $500,000, sometimes $500 million, or sometimes it can cost $2.5–3 billion to go from A to Z. And for every molecule, and I've seen them written in different circumstances, for every 10 or 25 molecules that are started out, maybe one makes it there. So there's an investment cost that goes with the starting of a drug to one that end up being prescribed by your pharmacist or given you to an infusion. You have small molecules and then what we call biologics. Small molecules are pills. That's how they ended up. But when they're starting out at the lab, you don't say, hey, I'm building a small molecule or I'm building a biologic, I'm building an infusion. You start out working with the drug, and it turns out one way or the other where the chemistry takes you. Normally, drugs have a certain time when that molecule is first patented to when that patent runs out, and all of a sudden, hey, other companies can jump in as generics. The IRA came in and said, well, we're going to allow 9 years from that time of that molecule starts for pills before they can be negotiated, and allow 13 years for biologics. So there's a delta of 4 years, the difference between a pill and infusion, that, truth be told, was just not fair. I don't think it was done with any nefarious means. I think it was just done out of ignorance. The sad thing is, what has happened since that time is you've seen the plummeting in curves and the number of pharmaceutical companies researching or maybe trying to investigate medications that will be delivered in a pill and going up in a higher infusion form. What's the problem over here? It's costlier, it's more timely. You know, I live in a place where I take care of patients that are 2 hours north, 2 hours south, and if you're out on the Outer Banks, sometimes it's literally a day to come all the way to Greenville and go back. Why would you subject patients when they could take a pill rather than someone who had to drive, literally spend a day to get an infusion? So what we're trying to do is actually put back some sanity to it, puts back some parity to it, let the small molecules be on the same level playing field as the biologics, just so there's parity in this. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that you're going to have to negotiate for prices. It's just going to push it out a little bit. It's just more fair.
And what's the timeline? This bill has been introduced. Do you think it gets across the finish line this year, this Congress?
Yeah, so it was in our reconciliation package, and I think there was some, let's just say, differences of opinion a few weeks ago with the most favored nation status, or most favored nation proposition, and I think there was some little, you know, I don't want to, it got thrown out. And I've pushed our senators, try to push it in on that side. The senators are running their own different scheme. I think if it's not done in reconciliation, I think there's enough, especially now Democratic support, which they were afraid to with the last administration, support for this. Hey, this was something that government screwed up. Let's fix it and let's move on.
Another area you've taken a leadership role on when it comes to the IRA is physician payment price setting. Tell us a little bit about that, why you're so passionate about it.
So I ran a private practice for years, very busy surgical practice in Eastern North Carolina. We were the busiest practice in the state as far as urologists. In fact, I, for 3 years running, was the busiest urologist in the state of North Carolina. It's on ProPublica, look it up. And not by desire, but by necessity, because we had so few urologists, and we are a tertiary referral center, so people came from hours to come and see us. My problem is that CPT codes and your payments for each of your office visits didn't pay the bills. I had to resign from my practice when I ran for Congress because of congressional rules. I turned to the next fellow who was up and said, look, I'm happy to help you learn the business, run this. You've been working it together. And he said, frankly, I don't want to do it. We're not going to do it. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, look, 3 out of the last 8 quarters, we had not taken a salary. Try running your business that way. Try paying your mortgage, et cetera. Because our reimbursement has been cut. Hospitals offered us an employment status, and that's guaranteed money. We're going to jump to the hospital. It literally broke my heart that day. I couldn't argue with what they're doing. How can you ask somebody to not take money for what they're doing? But this is the status of where we're in. If you look at what's happened with physician reimbursement over the last 20 years, it has gone down, inflation adjusted, close to 30%. Okay, name another government employee, if you were, we're employees essentially, that has had that much of a hit. And with the rise of medical inflation, which is sometimes 14%, staff wages go up. It's just not a viable business model. And so, look, I'm fighting for us to have private practice because, in my opinion, it is the most efficient, the most patient-centered form of medicine. I think a lot of this now is turned into corporate medicine, and I'll beat on my own physicians as much as anything. I'm an equal opportunity offender when it comes to healthcare because there's so many things that we do right, but there's so many things we do wrong. But now it's gotten a different mentality. I'm on the clock, it's handoff, rather than when I was in private practice and a doctor called me to see a patient, I would say, do you want me to see him today or tomorrow? It's a different mentality. So we have to pay our physicians enough to allow them to stay in business.
In North Carolina, as we were talking about earlier, there's a lot of investment in future drugs in your home state. Yeah. What are you hearing about from your constituents, from venture capitalists and others when it comes to that innovation economy? And are you concerned that, as you said earlier, you know, with the different changes that you're trying to kind of put back in place, that there could be less investment being made in these areas?
Sure. You know, if you look at, I think, excuse me, one term or one word that may Sorry, guys, I don't know what's happening. Maybe the Chinese got to me because I'm going after them. But if you look at one word that could describe this administration, I think it's accountability. You know, if you've ever run a business, if you've ever done anything of similar nature, your first quarter or even your last quarter, you sit back and look and say, all right, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? And how do we move forward? Government has never done that before. 250 years, we've never had a reset. You know, Obama said, hey, let's do this. Clinton even said, let's do this. No one's ever really done it. And so I think accountability has really permeated every sector of industries in the United States. So if you go to North Carolina, we have this most wonderful thing, excuse me, called the Research Triangle Park. In fact, my dad was recruited there in 1969 to work for a company named Burroughs Wellcome, and it was the third company in the Research Triangle Park. I think now there are close to 150 companies out there. It is a cauldron. It is a hotbed for innovation, research, development, beautiful, smart, brilliant minds coming together to try to make the world a healthier place. There's a lot of investment. We have North Carolina State, we have UNC, we have that other school that people call. Anybody go to Duke in here? Don't raise your hand. Okay, good. And then even if you go past that, either further west, you've got Wake Forest University. You've got now the Innovation Corridor down in Charlotte. There is a hotbed of research. But as resets occur, and as if we look at the big picture of where the debt of this country is going, we're doing this, guys. If you read Ray Dalio's book, How Nations Go Broke, we're doing this. And therefore, how do we reset? How do we demand accountability? How we achieve accountability? And it's going to take some painful things, and some of it may be due to investments. And again, people are going to have some short money on many different industries. May be happening somewhat in the pharmaceutical industry.
I want to talk about chronic diseases. They cost almost $1 trillion. That's a trillion with a T. Yeah. What role does you think about the innovation economy, drug development have to do? What role could they play when trying to bring some of those prices down?
Sure. You know, when I first started practicing years ago, the rate of obesity. Now, North Carolina has a different population. We have a large minority population, a large migrant population. We also have this thing called barbecue. Anybody ever had Eastern North Carolina barbecue? We're having actually a truck come up in a couple weeks to do it. Don't hate on me, but it's good stuff. But we have a fast food restaurant on every corner. Bojangles. Anybody ever have a Bojangles biscuit? I have one. Like allow myself one once a month. But the problem with obesity is diabetes, renal disease, cardiac disease, all these things that are chronic diseases that do cost so much, and it becomes a revolving door with the hospital with a lot of these patients. You know, Wegovy, those type of medications, truly, I think if you look back on landmark medicines through the course of medicine, penicillin was the first hypertensive medications, made a huge difference. But those type of, the Wegovy, the Sagria type of medicines are really going to be an inflection point because they do a lot with metabolism. They also had some renal sparing effects for people with renal disease. There's even some anti-tumorigenesis effects that we've been seeing so often. These are things that the industry can help. But the problem is the United States has always looked to a pill or an injection for its health care. Compare us to you know, Western Europe, for example. You don't have that same mentality. And so I would love us, and this is what's going on with the MAHO movement, which I think is a great reset. I think it's a great reset. Let's actually look at what we're putting into our bodies and how is that making us, excuse me, unhealthy as we move forward. That said, you know, if we can't get there, God bless us, we have wonderful drugs.
We were talking backstage a little bit about the U.S.'s role vis-a-vis the rest of the world when it comes to drug development, when it comes to healthcare. How important is it to you that the U.S. is a leader here and doesn't kind of fall behind? Yeah,
and the U.S. has been the shining star on the hill as far as innovations. We've poured the most money into it. Britain, Western Europe, there still are some great scientists that come over, but a lot of them come over to the U.S. to do their work. We have to maintain that edge. If we don't, China's happy to go and take our place. And again, you know, I've said this a few times, and hopefully one day we'll say we don't have to worry about this anymore. But we are at war with China. Let's just pull the scab off, pull the Band-Aid off. We are at war with them economically, espionage, agriculturally, Maybe not ballistically, but we are at war with them. And they steal a lot of our things, and they're going to be not reluctant at all to try to steal our greatest scientists if they offer them the money.
I mean, given that, like, one step deeper, I mean, how does this intersect with the bilateral agreements, the global drug access? I mean, this the war with China, but is it also important to think about what prices in the U.S. versus Europe or other places?
Sure. And I think this is where the most favored nation issue came in.
Right.
You know, our drugs cost so much. We have insurance companies that deny. I had surgery last summer where I had a pituitary tumor, and I've been very transparent about this. I don't really have a functioning pituitary anymore, so I have to take a lot of medicines for basically replacement. I've got my Save My Life pills in my pocket. Fortunately, most of those are generic. They're cheap. It's because they did wonderful research, sometimes even 50, 60 years ago, for a lot of these things. But if you look back on saying what's going on in Europe, what's going on in India, what's going on in Greece, what's going on in the US, we're able to access medications that so many other countries have not. But with that luxury, we also pay a lot more. If we rescinded and we cut back our formularies, I think our prices would go down. But also, if you look at our mortality rates and you compare them to Western Europe, good Lord, compare it to India or China, we live a lot longer through the intervention of pharmaceuticals.
We are almost out of time here, but I wanted to kind of close this with, there's that push-pull between regulation, between innovation, the private sector. What's your view when it comes to that issue? What's going to help spur innovation and access? Is it the EPIC Act? Is it the Orphans Cures Act? Kind of, what are the one or two things that you would really like to see done in the next, 6, 9, 12 months?
You know, the great thing is there is this built up potential energy. It's not even potential energy more of our scientific community to find that next cure. It is a wonderful thing. We are not sitting on our laurels and saying, hey, in 2024, 2025, we've done it. We've done it, because there's so many things that we need to cure. Sickle cell anemia, I don't know if you've ever known anybody with that, is a horribly painful disease. And I've taken care of many patients with that, and my heart breaks every time I see one of those patients, because they become narcotic dependent. It is just a horrible, tragic disease. We now have a treatment on the cusp of disease that we will treat these people, reverse the genetic aberration, and cure them. And you say the big C, cure. I don't say that with cancer a lot, because the only way you know if you've cured somebody with cancer is if they die from something else. But you can say that with sickle cell. You can say it with hepatitis C, that you've literally cured these things. And so I think in the mindset of the American scientists and the American pharmaceutical industry, Incubate follows these things as far as investments with their investment tracker, which is a great thing. We need investment. But at the same time, guys, we have to still reset, and say, how much money can we spend and not bankrupt the future of our country? I think that's the hard problem, the hard calculus that everybody now literally has to think about all the time.
All right, Mr. Murphy, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
All right, sir.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
We're going to do a quick set change and then get on to our fireside chat, so it'll be just a minute. All right, a very short break. I'd now like to welcome John Stanford, founder and executive director of Incubate, and Janice Nave, venture partner at Coda Capital, for our fireside chat. Thank you so much. Janice, thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, well, we covered a lot of territory with Mr. Murphy, so I have no doubt we will keep this conversation rolling here. I want to start here with you, John. Set the stage. Share with everyone here a bit about, we heard Mr. Murphy kind of at the end talk about Incubate and what you all are doing, but give us kind of the 100,000-foot view of what Incubate is and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it gets to that continuum that we talked about how new drugs come to the market. After something incredible happens at NIH or a university, when you think about what they're doing there, they're playing around with things. And sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen, but you don't have a drug, you don't have a product. Then we spin that out into, now I'm going to say something profound.
I know, we're already.
And now we're going to talk about venture capital. You spin that out, and everything is still highly, highly risky. As the congressman said, 1 out of 25 is successful. That's an incredible failure rate. The only people willing to fund that aren't really the capital markets in the sense of the stock market. You're not taking that kind of risk. That's where venture capital steps in. And venture capital takes pools of money from endowments. I've got a real live VC sitting right here next to me. And they fund the early stage, the riskiest of the risky. And we really felt that voice was missing in Washington. So 8 years ago, at the behest of a lot of the leading VCs in the country, we created Incubate to be that voice. The pharmaceutical companies do a great job bringing the manufacturing perspective here, and they play a critical role that we'll get into. But we really felt like VC needed its own voice, and that's who Incubate is. And we're out here trying to make sure that U.S. dominance in the life sciences remains strong.
Janice, Coda Capital invests in early stage technology companies. Can you talk, we heard a little bit about Mr. Murphy talking about the IRA, the implication of the changes, in terms of how long you have drug exclusivity. Can you talk a bit about the current environment from the venture capital perspective and how it's becoming more challenging to make those investments?
Yeah, it certainly is becoming more challenging to make those investments. I mean, I started my career as a bench scientist, so I knew firsthand, doing experiments, how many of those fail, and then moved further into, kind of business development, venture capital, and so I've kind of seen the continuum. And I have to say, today it's become probably even more challenging than we saw the crash of 2008. And I think it's probably a myriad of things, obviously the cost of healthcare, but also the return on capital. It is definitely, the good news is we're developing newer and better drugs, but the challenging news is that it costs more to develop those drugs. It's highly risky to be treating some of these, rare diseases and such. So venture capitalists do, they do have to answer to their limited partners and get a return on capital. And it's becoming harder and harder to do that now. And I would say that, having a true believer in the value of science and healthcare, we'd like to think that science does drive, healthcare progress, but, policy sets the rules. And if reimbursement and regulation hampers that, then money goes elsewhere.
Do you worry that funding is going to dry up for some of those early stage pharma companies, or that there's just less of it? You're having to make a stronger case maybe because of the current environment that we find ourselves in?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's what we've seen, or I've seen probably in the last 5 years as the capital started drying up, companies weren't exiting, that there wasn't a return of capital. And so now what we're seeing is, yes, indeed, there's still investment, but what we're seeing is it's the larger, multi-billion-dollar funds that are making the investment decisions, and honestly, they are being risk averse. So instead of seeing 20 million go into a small biotech, right, that's doing something really, challenging and new, you're seeing, 300 million plus with, 27 VCs piling onto something that's frankly a metabolic asset in licensed out of China.
John, we spoke during the Future of Medicine Project's podcast. It's a great podcast. I encourage you all to check it out. But we talked about the struggle that small companies face. Walk us through that in terms of, you had a great cinematic kind of analogy that I thought worked really, really well.
Yeah, and to be fair and respectful of IP, I will admit I'm stealing this from someone else. But, one of the struggles from an advocacy standpoint is getting people to understand the drug development process. It's 15 years, it's billions of dollars, and it fails a lot. So I like this analogy to making a movie. And you've got hundreds around the country, all these independent film studios you would never hear of, you would never know about their movies. And frankly, most of their movies are pretty bad. But they go out to, I think Cannes was last week, or they go to Toronto, or they go to a film festival, and Warner Brothers sees their movie and says, that's a hit. I want that. And Warner Brothers steps in and says, we're going to take this thing over the finish line. We're going to put a big budget behind making sure everybody knows it's out there, and we're going to get it to people. Same thing is true here. There's incredible science going on at small companies, and this is something we really want Congress to understand. The future of getting medicine to patients is not in the hands of small biotechs. It's in the hands of large manufacturers that have the manufacturing capability, the distribution, the payer networks. They're the Warner Brothers. And we have to have Warner Brothers in order to see some of those independent studios that would never cross our paths. So we're really concerned that a lot of this science is going to die on the vine. And it's amazing. There's so many members of Congress, both sides of the aisle. I want to beat up on big pharma, but I love small biotech. And as the VCs who, our return comes when the large manufacturer buys that small biotech. You can't break them apart, and it's foolish to try to do so, and that's some of the bad policy that we've seen.
Janice, what are some examples of that? What are some of the examples of maybe the independent movies, if we take it one further, that have become those blockbuster drugs that we, might be prescribed by our physician, but don't understand maybe the whole life cycle of that? Are there some kind of standouts that either have been in part of your portfolio or are examples that would be good for this audience to kind of say like, oh, I get it now?
Yeah. Well, I think I'd just give, one thing is that I think it's even growing now, but when I was last working at Amgen, at least 60% of a pharma's pipeline comes from these smaller biotechs. That they rise to the occasion, they have the molecules and they bring them in. And so I think if you look at any of the kind of the, I hate to call them blockbusters, the ones that are the really key sellers at the pharma companies, they probably originated at a small biotech. And, we have to look any further than even the COVID vaccines, right? So I think, I can't agree more wholeheartedly that one of the things is that as you look at the development of these drugs, yes, you have to develop it before you even put it into people, right? That takes a lot of researchers. You put it into a few people, see if it's safe, right? Biotechs can do that. You can take it into a phase 2, and see if there's some efficacy, right? Biotechs can do that, but there's very few that can take it into a phase 3 and get it on the market. Phase 3s, Amgen's cardiovascular drug Repatha was tested in 20 different trials over 10,000 patients over 5 years. Biotechs can't do that. We need the spectrum, right? So yes, and I'm not the policy person here at all, so it's up to you guys to kind of figure these things out. But yeah, some things definitely, I agree with Congressman Murphy. You have to fix some of these things here, but you can't ignore the fact that this is a continuum of effort that needs to happen in order to actually bring new drugs to people and actually, keep them out of the hospital.
Well, John, put on your policy hat. You are the guy who does that for Incubate. What are some of the policy reforms that are needed or that you all are focused on when it comes to trying to re-energize the innovation system?
Well, I think to steal from Dr. Murphy's role in this world, do no harm. And I would be remiss to not say the idea of something like most favored nations or setting our prices here to what we pay abroad would be a foolhardy handoff to China of global biopharmaceutical dominance. So the first is, let's not make the situation worse. We need a strong pharmaceutical ecosystem in this country, and there are several policies of the ilk of MFN that need to go by the wayside. Whether CMMI does it, whether the Hill looks at it, it's a bad idea. But we also need to fix some of the mistakes of the last administration. The EPIC Act, we are fully supportive of the congressman's effort to end that disparity. Same around rare disease. We have totally disincentivized investing in rare disease. But there's also opportunity out there. This is an unorthodox administration, and with that unorthodox style, there is opportunity. How do we speed the development of drugs? If we want to cut the cost of drugs, let's cut the cost of developing drugs. And there's a role for AI to play. There's a role even what we call in silico of allowing you to test things in computer models instead of animals to get the ball moving along faster and cheaper. Those are the kinds of things we should look at, but we have to move away from this concept of price controlling medicines. We don't have to guess what's going to happen. That played out in Europe. That played out in Japan. In Japan, 70% of the new pharmaceuticals over the last decade are not available in Japan. It is a crisis. They're hugely embarrassed that they weren't able to develop their own COVID vaccine. And so the rest of the world, Europe and Japan, are trying to get like US, whereas we're trying to move in their direction, and the beneficiary is China.
Yeah, I want to add to this China-U.S. relationship. On almost every single conversation we have that comes up, right? You heard Mr. Murphy talk about how important it is for the U.S. to continue to be a leader when it comes to innovation and the future of drugs. Do you see this really as a race between the U.S. and China, or is it the race between U.S. and all kind of global powers?
You know, we were at Bio last week, giant convention in Boston, and you know, we walked around looking at the size of people's different tents, and the Saudi tent was 2 stories tall with TVs in every room. Don't sleep on the Middle East. They are interested in being a cash market. They have mapped a ton of genetic information. That sickle cell treatment, the sickle cell, I didn't know this, disproportionately impacts the population in the Middle East, significantly so. And so they are lining up to be the first serious buyer. In the US, we can't wrap our heads around how we're going to pay for sickle cell treatments. They're there. They're saying this is going to be, so they want to bring that in. But at the end of the day, the scale and immensity of China's investment to be dominant in this space is unbelievable. 2 decades of scientists working around the clock is paying dividends. I think sometimes we get in this trap of thinking about China as low skill, low wage, billion-person population that they throw at these smokestack factories out of the industrial era. That's not China. China has world-class chemists, and they have, for every chemist we have in the US, they got 100 of them. And so they are throwing those people at the same problems, and sure enough, they're coming back with better solutions, which is why you see a lot of interest in getting drugs out of China. And I was on a panel a couple weeks ago, and someone put this so poignantly. What are we going to do from a national security perspective when China has the cure for diabetes? And we have to go pleading to the Chinese. Our population needs this. That chronic disease stat you gave.
Right.
The only way we cut that $1 trillion in costs is through drugs. What happens when we have to go plead with the Chinese for access to their medicines? That's the path we're headed on.
We are almost out of time, but before I let you both go, I'd like to finish on one last question that I often ask in these fireside chats. For those of you in the audience and those on the live stream, what's the one thing you hope they take away from this conversation? Janice, I'll start with you.
That policy has long-range implications. I did say that we'd like to think that science drives healthcare. It really is policy. And I think the best example I could give is an area that I'm quite interested in, which is chronic kidney disease and renal disease, is in 1972, the right thing was done. President Nixon and Congress passed a bill that said, if you have end-stage renal disease, you get dialysis paid for and you get transplants paid for. And that was the right thing to do, best intentions. But if you don't really pay attention to the policies, I would say today, end-stage renal disease has very little research into it, very little innovation and money spent, very little venture capital for a lot of those reasons. So I would say, of all things, it's very important about, think about your policies and the long-ranging impact of the policies that you're putting in place.
What happens here matters.
What happens here matters.
More so, quick anecdote, Incubate hosts a breakfast at the JP Morgan Summit conference every year. 5 years ago, I had to drag people in off the street to come to our breakfast. The passage of the IRA, the conversation around MAHA, around MFN, we have a sellout crowd every year now because policy has overtaken science. And so the last point I would leave is, this series has been incredible, the future of medicine. The future of medicine is our own making, and the choices we make in Washington decide. Science is no longer the barrier. We can come up with gene therapies for almost everything. We can do so much incredible stuff. Do we have the political will to stay dominant? And I hope we will, because the future of medicine, from a scientific perspective, couldn't be brighter.
All right, we are going to leave it there. John, Janice, thank you so much for joining me this morning, and a big thank you to Representative Murphy and his team for making him available today, and to Incubate for partnering with Punchbowl News on not only today's programming, but our entire project. I encourage you to check that out at punchbowl.news. Have a great day and stay safe, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, sir.